So given this sort of understanding of why people leave jobs, what organizations then want to do is go and start looking about, okay, who's leaving and where are they leaving from, and how can we use this to help us think about what we want to do about it. And so the first thing that organizations often end up looking is just kind of, where are they leaving from? One of the big questions is managers. Do we see that attrition is associated with different managers? And as we saw right at the beginning, spoiler alert, yes. Kind of every organization that does this, the big insight that they come back with is, wow, there's huge difference across our managers in terms of their rate of attrition. And obviously there's going to be some sort of natural variation. I think Cade is talking with you about the fact that in any data set, you're just going to see random variation. There's a point at which you don't want to read too much into it. If you look at it, you will see that there are some managers who are often real outliers to the extent to which you think this is more than random variation, and that does tell you something about where to start dealing with your attrition problem. You also, as I say, want to think about how we're hiring people. Are there people that we're hiring who are particularly likely to leave, and do we want that to inform our hiring processes and whether or not we want to look for slightly different attributes? Obviously, we want to understand, are there functions, types of work, types of projects that are really leading to attrition? What can we do to lessen their demands? And so on. Is it our high performers? Is it our low performers that leave? And there's also geography, right? Is it the fact that, for example, commute distances can be a big driver of turnover? While I'm on that subject, one of the interesting and challenging issues with people analytics is worrying about adverse impact. And so certainly within the US, and I think many jurisdictions, there are important regulations about discrimination. In the US, those regulations are not just about deliberate discrimination by race, ethnicity, gender, and so on, but they're also about putting in place procedures that have the effect of disproportionately screening out certain groups. And so as you think about, do we want to favor people within a certain commuting distance, you want to be worried about what does this mean about kind of, are we segregating it? Are there certain races that it's going to make life more difficult for? And indeed, I would say throughout doing people analytics on a practical level, at a certain point, you probably want to just chat with a lawyer to think about where might you get into trouble implementing some of these things and where might you. That aside, there are still all sorts of exciting things you can do in predicting attrition. There are some organizations these days that look at social network behavior. And so there's a belief that, when somebody suddenly starts updating their LinkedIn profile, that's often a sign that they're thinking about other opportunities. Is that a point at which you want to intervene? And so, all sorts of fun things you can do if you're creative to try and understand who's likely to leave and how we can intervene. In terms of doing this analysis, again, there are a variety of different things that you can do. Kind of the lowest level is take our different groups and types of workers and calculate, what percentage of them leave every year. These kind of standard attrition statistics that you see, percent turnover. Okay, and again, I would definitely encourage you to do tests for statistical significance to understand which of these differences are meaningful and which are not. I think a big concern with these straight attrition percentages is they really don't take into account the fact that people are much more likely to leave early in their tenure. And so you can certainly imagine certain groups, for some reason, a couple of people leave. They're then going to fill these with new workers. Those new workers are themselves much more likely to leave. And so it may end up looking like you've got a big attrition problem in one group, just because on average, workers tend to have been there less time. I think a better approach is actually to look at this on a cohort basis. And so produce statistics, say, okay, what proportion of people last 3 months, last 6 months, last a year, and so on, and compare those across groups, managers, and so on. Even better, kind of the same sort of approach that we talked about before with predicting performance, is to think about what are all of the various different processes or all of the different predictors that might affect attrition. Throw them into a multivariate regression where you're kind of trying to predict things like who stays 6 months, who stays a year. So multivariate structure enables you to start untangling, is it age, is it education, is it experience level, and so on, and see kind of what seems to have the strongest effect on who stays and who leaves. Even better than this, if you're kind of doing this professionally, is to use a slightly different class of models called survival models to really help you understand what's going on. I just want to spend a minute or two talking about what those are. So survival analyses take their name, I think, in part from the fact they're used heavily in epidemiology, where your question is, in the worst case scenario, we assign a treatment to somebody, how long does it take them to die, and who survives and for how long? And so what you see is something like the curve that I've got on the slide, where over time you want to understand what proportion of the samples stay at the firm. And you're probably going to see something like an exponential decay where, as I say, people early on in the job decide whether they like it or not. They're more likely to leave early. And then the longer they stay, the more likely they are to remain there. And so turnover drops over time. So what survival analyses do is they first try and fit this kind of time function. So we can see over kind of a range of people who've been there for different amounts of time, basically what's the likelihood of their leaving and how does that change? And then they say, okay, and now how do various factors shift that kind of curve? And so we could imagine some sort of variable, I don't know, let's say experience level at the point of hiring, which makes them either more or less likely to stay. So in this case, if it reduces their general propensity to leave, what this does is it shifts the curve upwards. And so at every point in time, people are more likely to still be at the firm. And so the nice thing about this kind of analysis is it means you're not just looking at kind of 3 months, 6 months, 1 year chunks separately, but you look at them all together, account for that kind of time dependence of turnover, and then say, what are the characteristics of individuals, the groups they're in, the managers, all those things that we talked about before, which of them ultimately make it more likely that people are going to leave at some point. And so what I've tried to emphasize over the course of this module is the different ways in which bringing data to the question could inform how we make some of the most important staffing decisions that not only shape how people perform in their jobs, but shape their careers as well. Ever since there have been organizations, we've been doing this based on instinct, hunch, and so on. Now that we have so much data about what people are doing, strong analytical tools, there really is the opportunity to bring more rigor to the process, make it more data-driven, and certainly all of the early evidence suggests that doing so improves the quality of decisions that we make, helping us get the right people into the right jobs and helping them stay there in ways that, again, are going to help the organizations and also going to make for better careers for the people within them.